Hello and welcome to the penultimate paper in the Derby Heritage Symposium 2020. My name's Ben and I'll be giving you my paper, which is entitled The Past as Digital Playground, a case study of the Assassin's Creed series and the importance of historical accuracy. This paper is going to be interspersed with videos of me talking to you directly, as well as short clips of gameplay from the various Assassin's Creed games, just to help visualise my arguments. With the tagline, "The past is your playground," the Assassin's Creed franchise boasts an impressive open-world action-adventure video game series which focuses its narrative on historically based fiction set within real-time historical events. The series has been widely commended for its lavish and faithful depictions of historical environments, which are fleshed out in order to immerse the player in highly explorable recreations of the past, bursting with the seductive quality of making the player feel that they are there. Discourses surrounding the role of historical accuracy and the reconstruction of cultural heritage in video games have emerged in academic discussions in wake of the game's success, such as that argued by Belair and Mundy, who warn at the dangers of potential accuracies in video games and their ability to perpetuate distorted visions of cultural heritage through appropriation and so-called Hollywoodization. However, Mackay contends historical video games serve as highly important mediators of cultural heritage, as games can represent the past as faithfully as possible, or in fictitious reimagining. But they are also projections of how players and developers wish to remember the past in a nostalgic and romanticised yearning for what was. The key aim of this paper is to establish the importance of historical accuracy in the development and consumption of simulated historical environments, with particular analysis of the Assassin's Creed video game series. The paper will argue along the same lines as those set by Mackay to emphasise the importance of historical video games in the consumption of cultural heritage. Ultimately, the paper will assert that these games transcend critiques of historical accuracy, as they are eloquent examples of what contemporary society values in its recreation of cultural heritage, and they often subvert expectations of what accurate depictions of cultural heritage should be. In April 2019, the world watched in horror as Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris was consumed in flame, destroying much of the roof of the structure and damaging the interior. Elements of this bastion of French cultural heritage were lost forever, and the building was subsequently sealed off, denying access to the site for the considerable future, while restoration works began. This catastrophic event serves as genesis for this paper, as the developer of the Assassin's Creed franchise, Ubisoft, donated €500,000 to aid in restoration efforts, and, most interestingly, made the 2014 installment of the Assassin's Creed franchise free for a limited time. 2014's Assassin's Creed Unity found its setting in the midst of revolutionary Paris in 1789 and features a breathtaking virtual recreation of the city, all painstakingly recreated from primary sources such as maps, photographs, and illustrations, all to 90% of its original scale. The crowning glory of this technical achievement is undoubtedly Notre Dame Cathedral, as this iconic building features heavily in the game's narrative and architecture, as the player is given the opportunity to develop a closer connection to the city and its landmarks. Ubisoft showed an unwavering dedication to create an immersive visual homage to the cathedral, fully furnished both inside and out as it would have been during the 1790s. Down to the paintings which would have hung on the walls. In a statement from Ubisoft in April 2019, they explained their decision to make Unity free for a limited time, stating that they wanted to provide everyone with the opportunity to appreciate this visual homage to this monumental piece of architecture, allowing continued engagement with this cultural heritage while its wounds heal. However, the virtual recreation of Paris does have its flaws in terms of historical accuracy, as Unity's Notre Dame features its famous spire, which was not present in the time the game takes place, instead being constructed in the late 1850s. But it is arguably one of its most recognisable features for contemporaries. As Mackay states, the developers chose to stray from complete historical accuracy in order to accommodate the contemporary player and to meet their expectations of the landmark as a recognisable piece of cultural heritage in the present. The virtual recreations present in games such as Assassin's Creed do not strive for complete historical accuracy, but are more eloquently described as allegories of the past, a romantic environment derived from historical reality. While commentators such as Jones and Osborne argue that the second-hand account of history could give a potentially flawed insight into historical periods, Cameron's work on the unnatural history of heritage displays why this creative liberty orchestrated by the developers is a much more astute use of Notre Dame as a piece of cultural heritage. Cameron states that heritage itself is not simply an exact replication of the past, as the present often gives it new meaning to make it more relevant to contemporary ideals or events. This mirrors the writings of Baudrillard, as he theorized that contemporary society would attempt to recreate the past in a virtual terrarium, down to its most minute details, in order to give it the allure of feeling lived in and immersive, but ultimately resurrecting the past in a distorted, neo-figurative homage based around contemporary values and a romanticized nostalgia. In its virtual recreation of Notre Dame, Ubisoft displays a clear dedication to history and a depiction of cultural heritage. However, it is clear that entertainment is the primary objective for the developer. When dealing with concepts as nuanced as cultural heritage, Ubisoft must give new meaning to the historical periods and landmarks they depict in order to give them continued relevance. These changes are made to virtual environments in order to make them more recognizable for players, thus making them more relatable to real-life benchmarks of cultural heritage, making virtual reconstructions more realistic to players. Therefore, historical accuracy is not paramount to the development and consumption of the Assassin's Creed series, but the games stand as fascinating examples of what contemporary society values in its recreation of the past. Games such as Unity can provide a lens into the past, whilst also providing one into the continued relevance and evolution of sites of cultural heritage in the present. While the reconstruction of benchmarks of cultural heritage in video games has been shown to inherit not only its historical features, but also its contemporary ones, the changes made to historical environments also goes deeper than just its recognizable architecture. In order to create a fully immersive virtual environment, the game series lets the player thoroughly experience cities and their cultures at key moments in time, often featuring key historical figures and issues, which serves to advance the game's narrative. The player is invited to gain knowledge of the past through the eyes of the main protagonist, experiencing their memories of what historical environments may have been like at the time, down to its most minute details. This integral characteristic of the game series offers a striking parallel to the perspective-taking skills involved in the work of historians, who attempt to consult and connect the lives of people contemporary to the time period in question. While the game series does consult historians in the development process, Copplestone argues that the game developers, or developer historians as they call them, have subjectivity over how the histories and cultural heritage being portrayed are reconstructed. They often attempt to drive the narrative through larger themes such as gender or ethnicity, as a historian would in their approach to cultural heritage. A poignant example of this comes from 2015's Assassin's Creed Syndicate, which takes place in the height of the British Empire in Victorian London during the 1860s. In an article examining Syndicate from The Guardian, Social and cultural historian Alana Harris argues that the game takes a social approach to its history by emphasizing the oppressive nature of industrial society. According to Harris, the game confirms the common belief that the Victorian period was a time of oppressive class struggle, often emphasizing the Victorian cult of the innocent child, the Dickensian depiction of innocent cherubs waiting to be saved. A core gameplay objective is to liberate child workers from oppressive factory conditions. And while the game doesn't emphasize what these children are liberated to, it is a fascinating example of how the cultural heritage of Dickensian narratives are still in play in depictions of industrial London. This is also present in a trailer that was published to market Syndicate before its release, which features its two main protagonists, Evie and Jacob. Evie and Jacob narrate over gameplay, and Jacob tells the audience, "When you steal from the rich, it's criminal, but stealing from the poor, that's capitalism." Evie replies, "So we fight for justice." Undoubtedly, developers chose to adopt this social history approach, as London's industrial past is highly identifiable among contemporary audiences. As a post-industrial city, many of its industrial sites have been long demolished or adapted, and now players can experience these sites recreated in a virtual environment, appealing to the allegories of cultural heritage that still have relevance in contemporary society, such as the writings of Dickens and the pieces left by industrialization. Dickens himself appears in the game, as he gives the main protagonists objectives to drive the game forwards. The developers sought to spare no cliches in their depiction of Dickens as an eccentric genius, relying heavily on the romanticized version of the figure key to his impact on cultural heritage. The developers also opted to involve the subject of gender, but not in a way that is historically accurate, but emphasizes narratives of social justice that are present in contemporary society. Prostitutes are notably absent from the game world, even from the streets of the infamous Whitechapel, despite the fact they caused moral and medical panic throughout society at the time, undoubtedly maintaining their place in the cultural heritage of London through the crimes of Jack the Ripper. This issue represents the earlier point made by both Mackay and Baudrillard as a clash between historically accurate cultural heritage and modern culture takes place, and ultimately, the developer historian has subjectivity over the issue, opting instead to appeal to the contemporary consumer. Subjectivity has been exercised by the developer in the presentation of the cultural heritage of social and gender issues during the Victorian era in-game. Perhaps the developer opted to include social issues on child labour, as this is an issue that has nearly disappeared from modern British society, and parallels can be made without fear of creating uproar. However, issues around gender are still very much prevalent, and thus the game sanitizes potentially inflammatory issues. As displayed in Syndicate, complete historical accuracy and the portrayal of cultural heritage is not paramount to the development of the Assassin's Creed series. As a product of contemporary culture, the game has to conform to contemporary ideals around the presentation of social and gender issues, and ultimately, the ideals of the contemporary developers can and do influence the presentation of cultural heritage. As shown in this paper, current discussions around historical video games and the representation of cultural heritage is characterized by disparity, as well as criticisms of the nature of historical accuracy. While critics argue that the misrepresentations of history through a contemporary lens is leading to history as a brand, it is clear that rather than simply regurgitating historical facts, the games aim to contribute to the growing and varied representation of cultural heritage around the period in question, and should be treated as a valuable contribution to the ongoing relevance of heritage. As established by Gier, historical video games use a different understanding of history and heritage than academic sources would, because they also have to appeal to media-specific requirements that long-time consumers of the franchise expect them to meet in order to maintain the character of the series. This, coupled with the rapid advancement of digital simulation, allows the imagination to run wild in immersive virtual environments, which allows us to interact and play with the past for the purposes of entertainment and multisensory stimulation of players. Gameplay mechanisms, narrative, and the measure of realism the developers are seeking to achieve must be fully considered before comparisons with traditional historiography takes place. For example, a key mechanic that has given the Assassin's Creed franchise its character since its first installment in 2007 is the way in which the main protagonist traverses the in-game environment. Central to the game's character mechanics is the ability to climb almost any structure in the game using urban gymnastics, or parkour, allowing the player to interact with landmarks in a way that is unique and to quickly traverse urban landscapes. While the game series has been commended for its breathtaking recreations of historical cities, bearing remarkable resemblance to the real thing, they are altered, and distances between landmarks are shortened in order to improve and streamline gameplay around this integral mechanic, often making structures more easily climbable. However, this paper finds that this allows the player to interact and investigate landmarks in a unique and personal way, allowing these pillars of cultural heritage integral to civic identities to be explored quickly, moving from one landmark to the next in a form of historical tourism, experiencing all that these historical cities have to offer in quick succession. For instance, Syndicate's virtual reconstruction of 1868 London has a plethora of famous landmarks that can be explored and connected with by the player. And as many of these landmarks still exist, this is also a fantastic visual representation of the cultural heritage of London through its architecture. Thus, these virtual reconstructions of historic urban landscapes are not merely passively received by players, as they can actively use and construct how these landscapes function to further the game's narrative through play. Throughout the way in which players are able to interact with these virtual environments through the climbing mechanic, they are able to create new memories and experiences which are shaped by the game world, adding to the ways that these landmarks are interpreted as pillars of cultural heritage. A common complaint with traditional depictions of cultural heritage in museums and of landmarks more broadly is that they are imposing for first-time visitors, as they articulate power through the imposition of varying forms of private or sealed-off space, which often requires an admission fee, excluding some visitors. The virtual reconstructions of landmarks in Assassin's Creed and the use of the climbing mechanic provides new ways to interact and experience landmarks as sources of cultural heritage that is more widely available with the proliferation of video game culture. Through play, consumers are able to create more personal connections and experiences with cultural heritage, which develops their continued relevance and transmission in contemporary society. In conclusion, this paper has argued that historical accuracy is not integral to the development and consumption of historical video games such as Assassin's Creed. The developers simply contribute to the growing cultural heritage of historic urban landscapes and the societies they produced by appealing to their most recognizable traits. In their virtual reconstructions of landmarks such as Notre Dame, the developers of the franchise sought to pay visual homage to the site in a commentary of its continued relevance in Parisian culture, fortunately encapsulating its essence before the tragic events of April 2019. The developers of the franchise also wish to flesh out these games through the adaptation of larger themes such as gender and oppression. It is clear in Assassin's Creed Syndicate the developers sought to comment on the historical figures and issues that make up the cultural heritage of Victorian society, but as the games are products of contemporary ideals, they are also eloquent examples of what we value in our recreation of history and how contemporary issues can be played out in historical recreations. The game series is also beholden to uphold its core mechanics and character, as seen with the urban gymnastics mechanic. This leads developers to alter the visual appearance of historical urban landscapes around play, but this also gives the opportunity for the player to experience the cultural heritage of architecture in a new and more personal way, breaking down the barriers of traditional interaction with heritage. With over 140 million units of the Assassin's Creed franchise sold as of September 2019, it has shown there is clearly a market for the experience of cultural heritage through virtual reconstructions. While it is pivotal to encourage a measure of critical inquiry into the representations of cultural heritage in Assassin's Creed, as the games are products of contemporary society, the franchise represents a historically themed environment in which players are willing and able to immerse themselves in for substantial amounts of time. Perhaps with the growth and expansion of this market, we will see more faithful recreations of the past, which Ubisoft has already taken the first steps in creating with their Discovery Tour mode in more recent iterations of the franchise. This mode is a more traditional, historically themed tour through virtual historical environments, which removes all gameplay elements for a more educational experience, and this mode often points out where developers made changes to historical accuracy and why. Thank you for listening to my paper. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments, and I hope you enjoy the next paper. Thank you.